The Eastern Roman Empire has a long history of wars, politics and economics, which, even if extremely interesting on their own, paint only a general picture of the Byzantine society. This is a society traditionally characterized by its piety and order, a society of monks, soldiers, philosophers and merchants. But culture is much more than that. Thankfully, the Byzantines have left behind a plethora of artifacts that paint a different picture of their world. Satirical poems, sarcastic speeches, and ironic works of art, all of them testaments to a people that did far more than just praying. Instead, the Eastern Romans seem to have been more than capable and definitely free to think and criticize. Through examples of Byzantine sarcasm, drawn, between others, from the satire in the Middle Ages period, the Golden Age of Laughter, we'll try to describe the Byzantine society through its humor. What did the Byzantines laugh about? What did they criticize? And what allegories did they use to achieve this? To answer these questions, we'll present some of Byzantine satire and discuss the implications around their composition. Information about mockery and satire in the Byzantine period can be deduced by how the Byzantines depicted one of the most iconic scenes in the New Testament, the mockery of Christ. In the biblical narration, Jesus was blindfolded, beaten, and treated with irony by temple officials, priests, and Roman soldiers. Instead of the brutal scenes described in the Bible, however, what we see often depicted in Byzantine art looks much less violent. It's in the Kumanovo fresco depicting the mockery of Christ where we see a scene much closer to satire rather than a violent mockery. A depiction that gives insight into Byzantine political satire. There are several historical instances where similar scenes are described. First, during an attempted revolt against Constantine Monomachos led by Leon Tornikios. As Michael Psellos writes, when the rebels tried to siege Constantinople, the emperor presented himself towards them from atop the walls to show he was in good health. In response, the rebels staged a mock procession, very much resembling the Kumanovo depiction. They shouted insults, improvised comic dances, which took the form of stamping on the ground, accompanied by loud cacophonous music. Other instances of similar processions are described by Theophanes Continuatus to have been enjoyed by Emperor Theophilos, where he would sit on a chair and watch performers perform silly dances and jumps wearing long sleeves. Another anecdotal incident is described by Skylitzis. During the reign of Michael III, he and one of his most friendly companions, Grulos, would amuse themselves by playing a trick to Michael's mother, the pious Theodora, by causing her to submit to a parodic patriarchal blessing. Michael sat on the imperial throne in the imposing reception hall in the Great Palace, known as the Chrysotriklinos, and had Grulos put on a patriarchal vestment and sit by his side. When Theodora came forward and prostrated herself on the ground in order to receive the prayer of the supposed patriarch, Grulos rose from the throne, turned his behind towards her, and noisily broke wind. Certainly not the type of behavior someone would assume from an emperor. If you enjoy videos like this, consider supporting Project Glorious on Patreon. As a thanks, you get access to maps and art from our videos, exclusive articles written by our researchers, early access to videos, voting on and suggesting future topics, and much more. Click the link in the description. Byzantine artists depicted mimes through centaur-like figures. As it has been already made clear, ancient mythology is well known throughout the Byzantine era. Centaurs were associated with fantasy, disorder, humor and bodily excess. On ivory and bone caskets, they often appear as musicians or dancers wearing the tall pointed caps linked to mime performers. These figures probably do not show real theatrical performances of mimes directly. Instead, they use the mythological image of the centaur to suggest the comic and foolish world of popular entertainment. Since centaurs were hybrid creatures, half human and half animal, they were well suited to represent the strange, ridiculous, and sometimes vulgar character of mime performance. In this way, Byzantine artists dressed contemporary entertainment in an antique mythological form, making mimes appear as part of a classical visual language while still referring to familiar aspects of medieval daily life. As it is natural, satire was also targeted against rulers. A striking example of such mockery can be seen in the Darmstadt box depiction. Dated from the early 13th century, a parody-like depiction of a ruler resembling a Muslim king can be witnessed. He is naked, fat and beardless, all traits considered funny by the Byzantines, while threatened by assassins, meaning he could not control his own court. But the so depicted Islamic ruler, in this case, was not even the ruler of a Muslim state. Rather, the propagandistic representation of a pretender who managed to rule the empire for a single day, whose Muslim identity was added to delegitimize his position. This was the case of John Komnenos the Fat. John the Fat was the grandson of the Seljuk Ioannis Axouchos, a man captured by Alexios Komnenos, who was later incorporated into the Byzantine ruling elite, and a son of Maria Komneni, granddaughter of John Komnenos. Technically, being part of the Komneni family, he would have a somewhat legitimate claim against Alexios III Angelos, the ruling emperor at the time. A coup d'etat was organized against the emperor with the help of Georgian and Latin mercenaries, in addition to a significant backing of parts of the elite, including Alexios Mourtzouphlos. John managed to gain control of parts of the city, including the palace, but he was eventually beaten back. After his hard-fought victory, Alexios Angelos had to delegitimize the pretender who sat upon his throne. The Darmstadt depiction is a testament to this attempt. John Komnenos the Fat, depicted as a heathen king, is being satirized into looking nothing like a Byzantine emperor, fat and beardless. Efthymios Tornikis, an orator in the service of the emperor, describes the pretender as Persian, a common way to refer to Turks due to his ancestry, while he also states that John was so fat that the throne broke when he sat upon it. We'll conclude our journey through the world of Byzantine laughter with two 12th century findings from the region of classical Greece, Thebes and Athens. Fragments of pottery from these ancient cities, which rose again in significance during the Komnenian period, show that even provincial common folk produced satirical art, sharing their sense of humor with Constantinople elite, as those artifacts would have been made for everyday use with cheap materials by provincial citizens. In the Theban bowl, a naked warrior is depicted slaying a snake. Here, the nakedness of the warrior is not an attribute of honor shared with Homeric heroes, rather a sign of shame, drawing from Adam and Eve's shameful naked representation in the Bible. This is a common motif in Byzantine art. The Athenian artifact was found in the Agora of ancient Athens. It depicts a warrior fighting against a dragon. The warrior is identified as the legendary Digenis Akritas, the medieval Greek equivalent of mythological Heracles. The satiric aspect can be seen in the exaggeration of the imagery. The beast is pierced by 5 arrows, possibly showing the unlikeness of the deed. Katomyomachia, the Battle of Cats and Mice. This work is allegedly linked to Theodore Prodromos, a famous composer of other satiric works like the Ptochoprodromikon, which we'll discuss later. What is certain is that the book is dated from the Komnenian period, and it's probably inspired by the Ptochoprodromikon, a parody of the Iliad, of unknown origin composed during antiquity. In the satiric work, the plot revolves around a society of mice who try to face a cat who threatens their peaceful existence. The mouse society is cleverly presented as a human society would, with leadership roles and societal structures. The mice discuss issues of bravery and duty in stark similarity to the Homeric epics, especially the Iliad. But in the Katomyomachia text, the enemy is a single cat, a great beast, not an enemy kingdom like the Trojans. Thus the same deeper meanings, like forgiveness and respect, found in the Iliad are not presented here. Instead, what the authors probably try to showcase is the vanity of heroic deeds or even the psychology of a society at war. Delving into the scenario, the entire text is the discussion between two mouse leaders, Kreilos and Tyrocleftis, meaning cheese thief. Kreilos, meaning meat grabber, seems to be the main mouse leader who suggests bold action against the cat. He initiates the dialogue by describing the deplorable state of the mouse society, as they cannot even go out of their holes in fear of the cat. Bold action needs to be taken, in his opinion. In contradiction to Kreilos, Tyrocleftis is a more cautious leadership figure. He warns of the dangers that such a confrontation would entail. He states examples of fellow mice fallen like Homer heroes in the epic battle against the cat. This debate between the two mouse factions is a direct mockery of how society deals with danger. Should caution or bravery be chosen? And how are then politics shaped based on the people's emotions? In the end, vanity may have been the central theme. The mice who, after the debate, finally decide to confront the cat eventually just get lucky. No brave deeds are required, the cat is killed by accident. The Byzantines would often juggle through periods of militarism and diplomacy, with both approaches often being the option. Famed for their diplomatic means of dealing with enemies, there were often individuals that pushed towards direct confrontation, like Nikephoros Phokas or Basil the Bulgar Slayer, who are prime examples of this. Katomyomachia can thus be viewed as a satire of Byzantine foreign policy, as diplomacy was often preferred, but skilled personalities could influence decisions. Nevertheless, victory, like in the case of the mice, is always assured for the Romans. Luck, or maybe God, is always on their side. The Synaxarion to gaidarou is a didactic and satiristic work composed in the 14th or 15th century. Synaxarion is a word used to describe the lives of saints, and we can thus imagine that the donkey in this story will be compared to a saint, a comparison which could scandalize traditional readers in the Byzantine era. However, the meaning of the story is much deeper than a surface-level provocation. A donkey with a poor master meets a fox and a wolf, who coerce the donkey into joining them in their journey, a journey that was planned by the two predators who were trying to find a pretext to kill and eat him. For that reason, they tell the donkey they would have to use a boat for their journey, but their boat could only carry two of them, so one of the animals, the most sinful one, would be left behind. Thus, the fox and the wolf start confessing their sins. They have both killed and deceived many animals in their search for prey, but in the end they asked for forgiveness. The wolf and the fox both forgave each other, and their sins were thus forgotten. Then it was finally time for the donkey to confess. Once, he said, during a journey, when his master was not looking, he stole one bite of a lettuce. Both the wolf and the fox acted surprised and outraged. They deemed the donkey unworthy of living in this sham trial, just as an excuse for them to devour it. Nevertheless, the donkey managed to outtrick them by promising that his hoof would turn golden if they stood behind it. The predators caught the bait, so the smart donkey kicked them and managed to save its life. The main theme of the story revolves around power and justice. The two powerful creatures, the fox and the wolf, try to trick the donkey by using the facade of justice, thus attempting to seat the donkey into the position of the victim. The donkey in return uses their only weakness against them, their avarice. A direct critique to the unfairness during the Paleologan era, during which judges were actually active and the elite, like Ioannis Kantakousinos, were famed for their extreme wealth and avarice, many times to the detriment of the common folk, as demonstrated in the anti-Kantakousinos riots in large urban centers during the 14th century, or even the Zealot revolution in Thessaloniki. A collection of satirical poems, the Ptochoprodromikon, was composed by Ptochoprodromos, probably the same as the writer Theodore Prodromos, during the Komnenian period. In his poems, Ptochoprodromos makes a joke out of himself. He complains of his abusive wife, who treats him like garbage, accusing him of laziness and incompetence. In some cases, Ptochoprodromos refers to the emperor directly, begging him for his pity but describing the tragedy of his life. Shockingly, he even states that he once disguised as a traveling monk just to trick his wife into offering him some food along with his children. The text's humor lies in the deplorability of the hero, not the absurdity of the events. The hospitality shown to the traveling monk is something to be expected, essentially a norm, while the wife's position within the household seems to not be necessarily surprising either, as the standing of women within the household would have been admirable. In one more of his poems, Ptochoprodromos joins the monastery of Philotheu in Constantinople. Regarding his experience, he addresses his complaints to the Emperor Manuel Komnenos. As he has already made it clear from his other works, Ptochoprodromos was known for his destitute situation, and that was why he tried to join a monastic community. Food and shelter would be guaranteed this way. Nevertheless, monastic life seems restrictive and unfair. As far as restrictions go, one has to attend all church liturgies, even if they may seem boring. And as Ptochoprodromos claims, one must not scratch, one must not whisper, one must not make small talk, and despite all that, one must not look bored. On the unfairness side, new monks like Ptochoprodromos, who have only been in the monastery for 6 months, must do all the hard chores. Bring warm water for the ones that eat at the table to wash their hands, be the one to fill the cauldrons with water, clean the animal feces from the stable, and even jokingly be the one to guard the trash. On the other hand, monks who would be living in the monastery for 15 years would have great privileges. They would work on accounting and financing for the monastery and carry titles like domesticos or protopapas, and would often move around the monastery on donkeys and not on foot. Both of those critiques would probably reflect valid concerns in the Byzantine society. The extremely ascetic lives of monks would in times be a subject of mockery or even ridicule, especially as it often was a means for survival instead of a spiritual journey. Additionally, inside the same monasteries, issues of hierarchy and power would scandalize the public as they saw Pharisee behavior in the monks' upper leadership. The Byzantines seem to have had humor embedded in their everyday life and culture all across the societal strata. Of course, most of our examples come from the circles of the elite, but that can mostly be attributed to the abundance of records regarding emperors and officials. Nevertheless, stories like the ones of Ptochoprodromos or the Synaxarion of the donkey would be very popular with the lower classes. These findings paint a much more vivid picture of the Byzantine society, a society much closer to the one of ancient Greece, where theatre, comedy and philosophy were commonplace. Additionally, the themes of ancient Greece were always present throughout myth and culture, but even extended upon in some cases, as is the case of Katomyomachia, inspired by the Iliad, or the animal stories resembling the tales of Aesop. In the end, the Byzantine society is much closer than expected to our own. The common perception of the Eastern Roman Empire being essentially a huge monastic estate cannot be further from the truth. The church, the monasteries, and even the divinely guided emperors were all subjects of criticism, mockery, and even ridicule. Everyday people would judge and laugh about their own lives and misfortunes, the faults of their institutions, and the inadequacies of their leaders. All of this using a combination of exaggerated vulgarity, at least for our standards, and smart, well-educated humor based on ancient references. All of this was performed in stark similarity to modern-day Mediterranean and Middle Eastern societies.